Nick here, Animal Engineering. On this episode we are going to get the gearbox, the drive shafts mounted into the chassis. So we'll make some supports and tabs up for all of that. You missed the last episode, we got the rear end is all situated. So we're just going to keep moving forward. So I want to get the gearbox done, the drive shaft done, there's rear brake lines, need little tabs made up for them, and also something for the handbrake cables. So first things first, I've just got to get I'll put the radiator on the front, that's just sitting there. First I'm just going to get the radiator back off and get the drive shaft out of the way so that we can measure down and make sure the motor is dead straight with the chassis and the table. So I will quickly remove them and then we'll start having a look at doing the gearbox mount. Alright, so now that the drive shafts and the radiator is out of the way, I've set up some little blocks on the table, so at the back of the gearbox and the front of the engine, so I can use them. They're centered on the table, so I can use them to come up with a square for the gearbox. I've also taken the rubber coupling off the gearbox just so I can get to that little spigot bit. So on the front here I've got this all centered up on the table, so we should be able to measure from this out to the crank pulley to make sure that that is central. So these blocks are all machined and pretty spot on, so I'm just going to use a square and put it on the block and then measure it to the outside edge of the pulley. We'll do that on both sides and see how central it is. So we've got 48mm on that side, 45mm on that side, so that's 3mm, so that's an 1/8 of an inch difference, which is what, 1.5mm. So the motor's got to come 1.5mm this way, so that's 1/16 of an inch basically. So we'll see what's going on at the gearbox and see if that's telling us the same thing. So the gearbox, in theory, the gearbox should have to go that way, which should pivot this around a touch. So we'll jump around there and we'll have a look at the gearbox. So my plan here is just to use this factory gearbox mount. Mainly for future maintenance reasons, you know, look, if anything goes wrong here, it's just easy. You can go down to Auto One or Repco or somewhere and, you know, just get a brand new mount, nice and easy. So it looks like it's sitting in the frame pretty good. So I'm assuming it's somewhat symmetrical. But you can see this side is a little bit closer than this side, which is kind of like measuring up the front there was telling us that this had to go that way. Alright, so I've got a little block down here that's set up central to the table. So I'm just going to run a square up until it hits on the edge of this little spigot, and then we should have measured back to the block. Alright, well, it's a bit of a bummer. So I've had a measurement up there. Now I've got the gearbox sort of shunted as far that way as I can before this factory mount is actually hitting on the chassis frame. Now I do still need to go 1/8 of an inch that way to get it centered. Well, rightio, I've had a bit of a play around, moved some jacks around and stuff. There was a scissor jacks all bent and messed up. Pulled the gearbox mount off and I was just thinking, I could just slot this. I was sort of, I don't know, in my mind I was thinking of using all the factory stuff, but really this is pretty ugly. So I don't know why I was actually considering using that, just being lazy maybe. Realistically, the only bit that's going to wear out is going to be this piece. So I'm going to keep this piece and then basically just make it my own mount. I've got it perfect now. It's perfect at the front, it's perfect at the back, it's absolutely in line and centered with the table. So I'll bolt this up and we'll see what we come up with. I'm sure we can make something that's a bit more aesthetically pleasing than this. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm 6 weeks into making that, to then just bolt that to it probably is a bit ridiculous. So that is going in the bin. So we'll bolt this back up and then we'll get some measurements and jump into Fusion and see what we can come up with. Alrighty, well, call it what you will, but I went over to the house to get the old laptop so I could draw something up in the old Fusion. And on my way back through the shed, I almost punted this piece of steel across the shed floor. Now it is like a, was it 2 inch by 1 inch, so 50 by 25, fairly heavy wall. It is, it's got a hole drilled out of there, but the rest of it is almost the right length for what I need. And I feel this should be plenty strong enough, and it's sort of keeping with the box sort of design of the frame. So it was in my head I was going to bend up and cut and make this crazy thing and then weld it off that central bar, which possibly could have ended up looking a bit garbage. So I think I'm just going to, what do you call it, kiss, keep it simple, stupid. So I'm going to chop this up, drill a couple of holes, and that will be the gearbox mounted. Well, it's also that 2 inches, like the perfect width for the base of that little support. Also went through and I've actually tightened up the engine mounts. It sort of dropped down and moved over a little bit and ended up basically, it kind of pulled the arse end around where it needed to go. And I don't know if you can see there, but move that little bottle jack underneath that rubber support just so if there's any compression there when I get my measurements. I've got the engine sitting at the level it needs to be, so I thought I'd better put that underneath that, because if I measure and then weld my thing in and then drop the engine down and it compresses, it's just going to throw everything out of whack. So we'll cut this up, get a few measurements, drill some holes, and then we're going to move on to the drive shaft one, which is going to be a bit more involved. Alright, that is the gearbox in there mounted. You know, pretty straightforward in the end. Yeah, just sort of smashed it out. It was pretty uneventful. Just cut a bit of RHS and drilled 2 holes in it. As simple as it is, I feel it is better than putting that thing in there. So we'll tick that off the list. Now that, I've said it a couple of times in the past, but that's probably the easiest thing so far. So now I'm going to turn my attention to making a mount for this rear drive shaft carrier. Now I think I want to try and integrate a hanging system for the handbrake into that same mount. They kind of end up in about the same spot. So if I can kill 2 birds with 1 stone, that will be amazing. So before I pulled the Commodore apart, the donor car, I took heaps of measurements and angles and all that kind of jazz. And I've got the motors sitting at the angle it was. The diff is, well, that's 0.3 of a degree, tilting further down than it was. But I'm happy enough that 0.3 with these massive rubber couplings is okay. So to start off with, so on the car there's 2 holes. There's 2 holes in that carrier. On the car they are centered to the car, and then that bearing on that actual bracket is offset. So I think what I'm going to do is shim up either side of that bracket. Just keep shimming it up until I get the level of the drive shaft where I'll need it to be, and then I should be able to just slide the bracket along the packers and then get some measurements from there. So to start with, I think it's going to get me in a bit of the ballpark. I've got some 3" by 2" box here, so I was going to chuck that under both sides, and then we'll get out the old digital protractor and we'll see how far off we are. Rightio, well, I've got that all shimmed up now. It's within 0.05 of a degree of being the same, which I think factory was like 0.1, 0.15, I think, different. So now I'm just going to find a better way of actually projecting something up from the table so that I can measure to make sure that the bolt holes are centered, and then we can actually do some measurements and pull up some sort of design. Okay, it's the next day, and this is basically what my brain has farted out on the computer. So I've got those pieces, those are my little standoffs will come up. Got another bit there, we'll weld on the top, and then based off what I've measured there, I've cut these little billets already. So that bracket is designed to be bolted up onto something, whereas now I'm going to be bolting down. So that will fit inside underneath. So once I get all these welded on, I can fine tune the height of the bracket using these blocks, and then I can get the then I can get the drive shaft absolutely perfect. I may have to make a couple of these. The chance of these being spot on the first time is pretty slim. So we'll get these welded up, and then we'll chuck these on top and we'll see where we are. Righto, well, just drilled and tapped the holes and got them all mounted. So all up, it's ended up pretty good. I've got 0.1 degree difference between the two drive shafts. Before I welded it, I had 0.05 of a degree. I guess they moved a little bit when I welded, but I'm pretty happy that 0.1 of a degree isn't going to be a major bull buster. I mean, it's not a race car, it's not like I'm going to be revving it out to 11,000 RPM. Just might get close on that first drive though. But, pretty quick, short, sharp episode. This one ended up being a little bit less involved than I thought it was originally going to be. But then sort of moving forward, I'm going to leave the handbrake until I actually do the body of the van after looking at the Commodore. After looking at the Commodore, this actually sits way up here. So wait till I do the body of the van, and I'll probably mount it on the body same as it is the Commodore. So I think for now we'll leave it there. The next episode is going to be a biggie. Still trying to nut out of my head how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to try and get the front shock tower supports done. So same as the rear, I was originally planning on doing it in the floor of the van, but just maintenance, it's going to be a lot easier if I can just lift the body off and everything stays attached to the chassis. So trying to think about it and think how it's going to look, not too ugly. I mean, they're way up sort of rocker height, so it's going to be quite hard, but that's a problem for the next episode. So we'll leave it there. If you've made it this far through the video, as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.